everyone. My name is Lucie Lederhendler. I'm the curator here at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. Before we begin, I'd like to say that we are gathered with gratitude and accountability on Treaty 2 territory, which is the shared land of the Red River Métis, the Anishinaabe, the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dene, and Dakota peoples. And we are honored to be sharing knowledge with this exhibition from other First Peoples from other territories across Turtle Island. I'm offering this acknowledgement next to this piece by Mike Patten, The Colonization of the Moon 2, in order to plant a question for you to consider, that thinking in a moon way might be a way to think in a decolonial way. I mean, that when you think about all the things that make up our lives, from the earth to the moon, you think of them as yours because they are gifts and not property. And the way that we treat gifts is different than the way we treat property, because we understand that our treatment reflects back on the giver and on ourselves. So with that, we are here for a lunch and look with the problem of the moon. The artist joining me today is Doug Derksen, who is based in Brandon here as a neighbor of the AGSM. We're going to do a full walkthrough with people in person and anybody who's joining us online, including, I hope, some artists. Feel free to chime in anytime through the comments section on Facebook or YouTube, and our backstage crew here will deliver those questions to us so we can answer them on the air. So that was the ado. Shall we begin?
Go for it.
Okay, let's start with you.
All right.
Get the ball rolling. So let me introduce you. My bio's here. Doug Derksen is a photographer based in Brandon, Treaty 2, Manitoba. As a youth, he spent a lot of time outdoors working on the family fruit farm, as well as engaging in frequent outdoor recreation. He pursued a career in agricultural research as a means to contribute to sustainable crop production and to satisfy his interest in what lay beyond the fields. Although he has carried a camera around for most of his life, an unsuccessful medical procedure in 2000 compelled him to focus more acutely on photography as a survival mechanism. During the following 8 years of bed rest, he leaned into the priorities of spending time with his family and looking deeply at the natural world. A second surgery started a long, slow recovery. So today, although still somewhat limited, he's able to venture to remote places where he can witness, open to what is around him and what is within. And this is a perfect place to kind of bring that bio together. As we've spoken, you've talked a lot about the sense of the flow state. So start with the content before we get into the tech.
So this was taken on Long Beach, near Tofino, on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And it's taken in the middle of the night. I'd been here 2 weeks beforehand and taken pictures of the Milky Way from a slightly different angle. I had the Milky Way nicely arcing down to the island, and there was this little blue streak in the photographs, and it was bioluminescence, and I thought, isn't that cool? So I want to get more bioluminescence, and so I came out when the waves were coming in instead of going out thinking there would be more. And what I didn't realize that the problem with the moon is that the bioluminescence is only there when there's no moon. So it ended up being a really cool experience. Sort of to carry on from what you were saying, just a little bit about my health issues. I really was in bed or a recliner for almost 8 years and really wondering if I would ever join what would be normal, and sort of watched the world move by me and past me and people doing things, and I really wasn't part of any of that. And so I remember standing here taking this picture, and the tide's coming in. At some point I'm standing on sand, next point I'm standing in water that's almost over my boots, and it's just this extraordinary experience, smelling the ocean. It's dark, you can see the stars, and trying to capture sort of a moment of transcendence of being there. And then there's this really interesting dance of the flow state of feeling that. I guess I should say, during much of my early time with my recovery from this back surgery, basically I probably was cognitively impaired somewhat because of the level of pain, but yet my senses of feeling went way up. Emotionally.
Yeah.
And when I would look at a scene in terms of colors, I would just be overwhelmed by colors. And so if you look at a lot of the photographs early on, they're really rich and oversaturated, and that's just how I felt about it. And so the dance of just feeling this all, and then thinking about the intellectual side of, okay, how do I use my camera to actually capture that? And it's just this beautiful state of kind of adventure and
Yep.
being in a state of awareness.
State of awareness. Yeah. Some call it enlightenment. Some call it, various names. But this acceptance and oneness, right?
Yeah.
And so now, technically and spiritually, let's link that with the effects that you've achieved on this piece, right? So you have a lot of blur. You have incredible amount of luminosity coming from the moon.
Yeah.
So it's hard to believe that it's the dead of night.
Yeah.
And the still island there is a metaphor and technically significant in the piece.
Well, I was thinking about this afterwards. Like, I was really glad you chose this picture in particular to be part of the show, because it's always attracted me, and there's something about it. The solitary island, as things move around, it really related to my experience during my recovery. So there's definitely a metaphor for me being the island as things moved around, being beat up by the wind, the weather, the waves, and all of that, but yet being there and not, being strong and being there. So there's definitely that sense about this and the movement. Like, I took a series of probably 20 or 30 photographs as I was standing here. And in the first one, there's no clouds. In the last one, and they're coming in from the right. And the last one, there's just a little bit on the left. And so this was one of those moments where it was bang right there. And what I like about it is there's this huge amount of motion here.
Yeah.
And it almost looks like the clouds have been caught on the island and just kind of hanging there. So that's a piece of that. And one of the other things I wanted to comment, and especially since Rob is here, you're right. We talked about the idea of rather than just having this be a canvas on the wall or a print on the wall.
Because you like to print on canvas largely, yeah.
Normally I print on canvas, and I really like it. I like the texture. It's got sort of a feel to it, and it sort of takes it a bit out of the photographic realm, just a little bit, which makes some painters uncomfortable. It's just how that works. And so we talked about having somehow lit from the back so that the light would come from the moon, the same way it is when you're experiencing it. So that was the goal of this.
Yeah.
And then I talked to Rob Lovett, who's here, and he spent quite a bit of time working on finding a media that would work to actually be able to do that. And although this looks very much like it is lit from the front, and it is to some degree, there's a huge amount of light coming through it, which...
Yeah, I would say 1/5 from the front and mostly from the back, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and I really like the feel of it. It very much reminds me of the feel of being there in that moment.
Yeah. Are there any questions? Before we move on, Emil? Okay. It's all one big theme. I neglected to talk about the premise of the exhibition in the first place. This idea of the problem of the moon comes from actually an episode of Radiolab, the podcast, the science podcast, where Dolnick was, I think Richard Dolnick is his name. He wrote a popular science book called The Clockwork Universe about basically Newton, the invention of calculus. And the host, Robert Krulwich, said, we're going to call this the problem of the moon. This idea that Newton was staring and going, how can gravity explain that the moon doesn't fall? Right? This idea that the moon not falling is the problem with it, even though that's obviously the best thing about it, right? Mm-hmm. And through thinking about this, the rock, because Galileo had just discovered that the moon is made of rock, came up with orbits, right? Came up with the idea of gravity that explains everything, right? The clockwork being kind of divine design. And I found it funny, this idea of the problem. So your problem, I had just seen one of your photos that was the Northern Lights that had a moon in it, and the overexposure was really intense, right? You had to decide what light was happening because the moon was kind of intruding, right?
Yeah, the moon is very difficult to take technically, to shoot a good picture of.
Yeah, so in curating, every piece is what's the problem of the moon that these artists are addressing. And so I want to move right on to Bettina Forget, who links to you, first of all, because her background is artistic, but she has a very, very scientific approach. And she's somebody that I was aware of this work when I was back in Montreal. She's this series with impact is something that she has manifested in many different ways. I will read her impressive biography before we go into this series. Bettina Forget is the director of the SETI Institute's Artist in Residence program. In this capacity, she facilitates the collaboration between artists and SETI, which stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence project, between artists and SETI researchers, foregrounds art science research practices, and creates opportunities to disseminate the resulting art products to a wider audience. She is currently a doctoral candidate at art education at Concordia University. Her research now examines the recontextualization of art and science and how transdisciplinary education may disrupt gender stereotypes. Bettina's creative work focuses on space sciences, inspired by her avid engagement with amateur astronomy. She has exhibited her artwork in the USA, Canada, Germany, Iceland, Russia, Spain, Singapore, and Nicaragua. Born in Germany, Bettina studied at Central St. Martin's School of Art in London, at Curtin University in Perth, and Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts in Singapore. So she has been everywhere, and with her also has been her trusty telescope, which is a manual telescope, just like the one that Newton invented. Nothing too fancy. It enlarges through mirrors instead of lenses like Galileo's. But the way that she draws these is just like Galileo drew his moon, which is in the dark with a telescope. She says a flashlight around her neck, or if she's in the city, just by the light of street lights, and she looks, and she draws, and she looks. So it's very much like a life drawing, like doing a still life or portrait, right? She says these are like portraits. What they are is drawings of every crater on the moon that's named for a woman. It's about 2% of the craters on the moon. Currently there's 32. We're missing just 2 in this series because there were 2 more craters that were named since she started, or since 2019, which is where this series ends. And that's out of 1,500 something. It presents a really really clear vision of the way that we think of women in sciences, because the naming conventions of the moon are to name landmarks as we map it more and more precisely after scientists, not necessarily astronomers, just any scientists. All of these drawings are accompanied by the last name of the scientists that they are named after. And this kind of concept that there are just fewer female scientists is not true, right? As far as contributions, as far as what's happening currently, and it reinforces a tendency to lag encouragement of these women. So she's expanded this to paintings. She co-creates with the atmosphere sometimes. She 3D printed positive sculptures, 3D things, what you 3D print, little plastic jobbies, positive versions of these craters, and strapped them to her feet and walked along the beach for a while. Very, very interesting work out of Bettina, and she continues to be in Artist in Residence. Now she's working on a wonderful exoplanet series. But this will continue and hopefully continue to grow as well as more craters are named after women. And Bettina continues her work in art and education, bringing women into the STEAM disciplines, right?
If they're looking for names of women scientists,
Yeah.
I can provide a few.
You should.
The research group I was part
Yeah.
of was half women,
Yeah.
which was unusual, I think, becoming less unusual.
Yeah.
It was great. It's nice, there's no issue.
No, there's absolutely no issue. Right? And it's something that that comes up a lot in I think so many fields, where because of the way that that naming practices shape the way that we read history, we have this incomplete sense of history, right? That there were no great women artists because there were no women making art, for example. That's not. It's because they didn't get canonized in the same way. Questions? Bettina? Fabulous work, and she's continuing it. Now I would, we don't have to go in the full circle. I want to talk about colonization of the moon, where we started. Because of the so this is kind of the most heavy-handed metaphor, right? This is a piece by Mike Patten, which I said before. This is the second version of it. He has one from 2019 that's in a private collection, so he kindly made us a new one. And this idea of linking naming as a way to assert ownership over something and planting a flag, right? That's a little more on the nose. This is mine now, right? I'm going to read Mike Patten's biography. My notebook here. Mike Patten is a contemporary visualist based in Montreal and a member of the Zagamay Anishinaabe First Nation in Saskatchewan. He has a BFA in painting and a BFA in drawing with a minor in art history from the University of Regina, and he has participated in solo and group exhibitions internationally and nationally in museums, artist centers, commercial spaces, and university galleries. In 2017, he was one of the laureates for the Natasha Foundation's Reveal Indigenous Art Awards, and he is presently the director of the Contemporary Native Art Biennial in Montreal, known as BACA, a nonprofit organization with the mandate to recognize and support contemporary Indigenous art and artists. So you can see that his background and kind of general project as an artist is very much about decolonization of contemporary Canadian art, and he often works in kinds of visual puns. So when you, as in Bettina's case, look at the mapping of the moon, people are getting more and more precise as things circle even to the far side of the moon, things get named this way. You name something and then suddenly it's yours, right? This is something that comes up in Little Prince as well. You know, once you love something, then it's mine, and now I care for you more. Planting a flag, similar practice that's based on really heavy-handed nationalism. There are 5 flags on the moon. They all were U.S. flags, and they're all completely bleached right now because there's no atmosphere, so the sun is just pounding down on them. And they bleach quickly, right? They don't last for all. The United Nations has a rule that exists that nobody can own, no nation can own anything extra. So, said officially, this is a purely symbolic gesture, right? Planting this flag. So this is really drawing attention to the idea that there's anything other than a symbolic gesture that planting a flag could be, right? Okay. Let's move to Mike's other piece here. Okay. Okay. I think I forgot to put the Wi-Fi here. So let's just, everybody think strong Wi-Fi connections. So this is something completely new for Mike. Like I said, he usually works in kind of visual puns and sculpture. But he was, when I first spoke to him, it was about this piece. And I said, well, like, if you already, anything else? Like, what are you thinking? And this is a good point that one of my favorite things about this project was going on these studio tours. I only had a few artists who I knew. So Bettina, you know, I knew her work, and Mike, I knew this sculpture. But mostly they were just, have you been thinking anything moonish lately? And everybody, except for one out of 8 said, not really. Everybody else was thinking something about the moon. And this is what Mike Patten had been chewing on when we first, and what this is, it's called Speed of Night. It's an animation. The voice that you can hear is Wilhelmina Beauvais, speaking Kanyen'kehá:ka, explaining what is happening in the animation and naming 4 constellations in Kanyen'kehá:ka Mohawk language. And what it is animations of zooming in on these familiar constellations and then having them break apart, drawing attention to the role that stars play in wayfinding and orienting yourself on Earth, right? And the cosmos. And as space expands, what kind of mechanisms, what kind of specifically indigenous knowledges he's asking here, can we call upon in order to protect ourselves from despair and isolation, right? That when we become cosmically separated from one another. Okay, that's Mike Patten. Let's scooch over to Hanna. Any questions? Any comments? Sorry, internet, for being a little slow on the Wi-Fi. Okay. Okay. Why don't you move your laptop to the corner? That corner. Yeah. Yeah, just wheel yourself over.
You can turn this off if you want. Maybe that'll make a difference.
No, I want you to talk with me.
Oh, okay. It's just be the straight man or what?
Yeah. It's better with the conversation. I also want you all to talk too. Yeah. We're just waiting for the Wi-Fi to kick in better. I do. So, Hanna Yokozawa Farquharson is a Japanese-Canadian textile artist living in Saltcoats, Saskatchewan. She incorporates traditional Japanese cultural elements and aesthetics in her work, which at the same time reflects the land and environment where she now lives. 1 year after buying her first sewing machine in 2016, she began entering work into international craft competitions. Since then, her work has been featured in many juried exhibitions and publications, including Canadian Quilters Magazine and Studio Magazine Canada. In her work, she is drawn to minimal designs, which you can see very clearly here, that express the Japanese concept of wabi-sabi, in which beauty is found in imperfections and in simplicity. She looks for richness in the history and meanings of the objects that surround her, including the people who are part of it and the depths that they move within. So, I think the Japanese minimalism is really apparent in these two pieces, full moon and crescent moon. And on the title plates, you'll see that I've just used Hanna's words themselves, and that's because her intention is very much to promote joy, to promote happiness and peace and positive feelings. And I felt like I would sully that intention if I overthought things. So I encourage you to come read her poetry. I love the materials of these pieces, this heavy wool, right, and thread, natural materials, serving to kind of contradict the impression of the moon as cold and distant and dark, right? And specifically in the full moon, her words open, you can see shining stars and the light of the full moon trying to wrap around your entire body. It's another thing, and I think the reason that everybody has a relationship with the moon and the reason that you keep photographing it and all of these things is because she feels so much like a guardian, right?
So much as
a guardian, like a protector, because she's constant, right?
It's amazing. Like the moon certainly is constant. So we've got, yet it changes every night, and it changes with the season. So it's really an interesting part of our life.
Yeah.
It moves faster than the stars, so it's interesting in that sense when you look up. I was looking at the one piece here of the crescent moon, and it's actually almost exactly like a photograph that I've got, in the sense that it's that indistinct. And one of the reasons is that when you're trying to either see it or photograph it, as it sets or rises, it gets closer to the horizon, and it gets more and more of its atmosphere.
Yeah.
So no matter how good a telescope or lens or whatever you've got, it's going to be all rough.
Yeah.
And so both of these look very familiar in that sense.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, and perhaps we're there with technology to get the perfect photograph now. Got really good optics.
But like, what is perfection?
Well, yeah.
It's not untrue when it's filtered by the atmosphere. That's how we see it.
Yeah. So that's really interesting. So when I see a moon that's perfect and it's got all the features that this one has blurred, I kind of go, oh, I don't know that that's reality, because most of the time it's got some bit of haze, bit of cloud, bit of sun on it, bit of color on it.
And we spoke last night about the moon by the horizon versus the moon high. Seems to shrink 50 times, but in fact it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah.
And who figured that out? It's really interesting. We were talking about that I do Tai Chi, and there's 108 moves, and it's because there's 108 moons at one point. I don't know exactly how. Yeah, but there's supposedly 108
probably some equinox or solstice or something. Yeah.
And so somebody has figured this stuff out, and yet it's changing, and it's there all the time.
Yeah. So and I do encourage you all to come up and look at this closer, because in addition to the black details that kind of use a pointillist technique to render the dark spots in the moon, she's also created texture, just knotted some of that wool in order to create all of the different features that are visible to the naked eye, from Earth. And then the fun thing was, we weren't sure if I was going to be able to get these because they were in exhibition. She literally drove them from Regina on Tuesday so that they could be in the show. She was working on this, right? One of those great studio tours. I said, what are you thinking, moon? And she said, this is what I'm thinking, moon. And this is inspired by how much larger the moon is in Saskatchewan than in Japan, which links completely to what you were saying. Obviously it's not, but over the seascape next to the mountains in Japan, the moon just wasn't as big as it is in the open sky of Saskatchewan. And then thinking about that moon over a seascape, inhabiting it with whales, she also is referencing the belief of, I don't know what group of people, what series of people, but there's something that's easy to find if you Google it, that whale's song is communicating to Sirius, to a water planet in the Sirius system, which is a very nearby system, 8 point something light years away. So as somebody with ties to the ocean, who's very far from the ocean as well, this is something that I always think about the moon personally as well, is that it's not the ocean, but it is the ocean, right? The ocean doesn't exist without her tides, which don't exist without, obviously, the sun too, but the moon. And then she has a series of sculptures that replicate kind of more fossilized shellfish and these kinds of things. In this case, she's made it a little bit bigger and created waves, these kind of simplistic folded waves. So this is called Lunar Sea and this is called Lunar Waves, and they're a paired piece. Yeah, which I think is really remarkable, especially when you compare the emotional impact of this embroidery to this one, right? Yeah. Any questions? Okay, speaking of this lovely folded stuff, let's go to Paul Robles. Yeah, I should have tucked you in there. You're just kind of on display. I'm going to keep going. It's going to keep stuttering. Okay. Born in the Philippines, Paul Robles is a Canadian artist based in Winnipeg. He's recognized for his intricate cut paper works in which he combines the delicacy associated with traditional handwork that addresses psychological and emotional states ranging from animalist familiars, folklore, spirits, trauma, and grief. He holds a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Manitoba and a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Winnipeg. Robles has exhibited widely in Canada, USA, and France. He has participated in Plug-in ICA's Summer Institute Residence Program, Papier Art Fair, Montreal. In May of 2019, he exhibited a new body of work at C2 Centre for Craft in Winnipeg, and in summer 2021, his work was part of an exhibition at the Regina Art Gallery. So nice to switch right over here because of this use of origami paper and the folding that Hanna does in Lunar Waves. Interesting also that his work is so associated with craft practices because he said that what's kind of punk rock about his practice is that he cuts origami paper, which is really verboten. You're not supposed to make forms by cutting origami paper. But he's calling on a number of East Asian traditions here, specifically in this one, the Chinese zodiac. These come following a series of black moons that he started in 2011 following the death of his father, who had I don't know the cause of death. I don't know why I'm trying to do that. His father died while he was on a cruise ship at sea, right? So there's several interesting things. It was a full moon. The ocean is incredibly dark at night. I've heard. I've never been out in the open ocean at night, but because the light goes, even if the full moon is out, it goes into the water and then gets absorbed at the depths, right? So it's not even reflecting as much as you would expect, but the sky is enormous. So I started these Black Moon series, which you can see use the moon gives the parameters, right? The circular shape of it, and then also gives symmetry, but not symmetry. It's not actually symmetrical, any of these things, by any axis. This maroon one is specifically a memorial to his cat Milo, who died during the full moon after the fall equinox. So interesting that Robles is still also always checking on the moon phase when he loses a loved one. And this is following in the Black Moon series regarding his father. So all of these, Robles calls them familiars, these kind of animal guides, are taken from the Chinese zodiac, which is lunar rather than solar. Our zodiac, our zodiac, the Western zodiac.
So there are 12 different...
No, not so specifically.
No.
It's just these animals that he's selected are all represented. And the idea of, so when he talks about those who he has lost, he can always kind of name what their Chinese zodiac sign is, as a way to connect it, right? So, yes, another fabulous thing where I called him up about his black moons. He didn't have any black moons. He said, but I am working on new moons. So, and you can see he's also incorporated these translucent pieces in order to give it a luminosity, right? To give it some of that reflective quality that the moon has in order to make it something that provides light. Yeah. Okay. No, let's go over to yours, speaking of providing light.
Okay.
This is Doug's second one, all the way across the gallery.
Confusing the camera person.
You can make it. So Doug, moon over Clear Lake, or Rob for that matter. So this was a team effort.
Yeah, this was another adventure in trying to capture the moon, and so I was standing on the opposite shore at Frith Beach, at Clear Lake, and I knew the moon was going to come up pretty much in that certain direction. Yeah. And I was waiting, and I knew roughly the time, and it wasn't happening, and it wasn't happening. What's going on? And it was behind the low clouds, and then all of a sudden, bang! It came out. And for those of you who don't know, the full moon happens. It rises at the same time as the sun sets, only when it's a full moon. Otherwise, it's rising and setting at different times in relation to the sun. So if you imagine you're standing at that side of the photograph and you're looking towards the moon, the sun has just set, and on this day, there was absolutely no clouds in the west. And so all of this massive amount of red light comes flying at the moon as it gets into this space between the clouds. And it was just extraordinary, and for whatever reason, it was actually the reflection of the moon was kind of bent below this, and so I was trying to compose it and get it right. So it was an interesting adventure compositionally. The other thing that I really like about this is the moon. It almost looks like the sun. It looks like it's burning down through the clouds rather than rising into it, and I've had 4 or 5 people call this the sunrise. Yeah. And yet it's the moon, and as Sean David was saying before, it kind of fools you. You have to look at it and figure it out. And as you've said, it's all reflected light. It's not coming from...
Well, it looks like something kind of like the size of a house coming in through the clouds, right? Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder what, sorry, I forget her name, the artist from Saskatchewan, saying how big the moon is in Saskatchewan. Yeah. Well, I think on the prairies, because we have such an open horizon, you see it low, and that's usually when the moon looks biggest, when it's low. And so if you're in the mountains, you just don't...
You don't see it until it gets higher. Yeah, yeah.
So that's basically the story of this photograph, and within moments of taking this, the moon was gone into the clouds and it was dark.
Yeah, fabulous. And this one was selected specifically for this mode of exhibition, right? Because, as you said, what we really wanted was for people to be kind of blinded by the light coming at you from the moon. Yeah. And so because of the composition, this makes sense upside down, or it doesn't make any more sense upside down than it does right side up, I should say, because there is this illusion at work.
Well, I really like the idea that you had of putting it on the table, because you walk around it and it makes you think differently. So what is this thing and what am I looking at? Because initially I thought about maybe building a light box to go on the wall, But this, when you walk into the gallery, that sends all this orange light up, and so you kind of wonder what's going on.
Yeah. Initially, I wanted to do a slide projector that, but I couldn't get any of them to work.
Well, and I was looking at even printing it on cloth to have it hanging.
Yeah.
And so, again, Rob Lovett had some material that worked. He didn't have enough of it, so he tracked down some more of it, and it came in just in time. So this stuff arrived yesterday.
Yeah.
He had printed it a couple of days before that. So it was an adventure in figuring out the profile of the material and getting it right. And as you lay a photograph on a table and have light come through it, you see everything. So
you do, yeah.
It's both good and bad, from a technical point of view, but it's...
Well, this is important. So these are the two pieces that we have in. We've seen them now, and they're not your most technically perfect moons. You have some that are just perfect focus. You have some where the depth of field is intense. You have some where the color just feels immersive.
Yeah.
But instead, the ones that we've selected are the ones where the atmosphere is a problem, where the moment was fortunate, right? Yeah.
Well, I like that very much because that's the moon.
Yeah.
If you go outside, you'll see it. It's there all the time, or almost all the time, but you have to be there. And you have to intend to be there, and sometimes it just surprises you.
Yeah.
It's different all the time.
Yeah.
And both of these sort of evoke some of the mystical qualities of the moon rather than just the purely scientific and technical, which the perfect photograph brings out. So. And the other thing that's really interesting about this that asks questions, so you've got a reflection here that's different than here. This is in the shadow of the trees, and yet there's a reflection there, and it changes. So it's from a technical or scientific point of view, it's really interesting.
When you first showed it to me, I was like, what's happening there?
Yeah.
Like I thought a boat had gone by or something to disturb it more. I don't know.
No, I don't have a good explanation for it. What I like about it is that it makes a puzzle. And you kind of think, what is this thing? Is this the sun? Is it the moon? What is it? And yet it's that huge orb that's sitting there glowing.
And I do encourage everybody to stand on this side too. It just tells a totally different story. It's sci-fi.
Yeah, actually it is.
You need Will Smith to come walking out of it.
The lightsaber or whatever. Yeah, cool.
Cool.
Yeah, really good idea to do this, Lucie.
Oh, thanks. So this collaborative blend with Carrie because it's in the far corner. So this piece is called Getting Up, 12 kilometers south of James Bay. It's a collaboration between Oriah Scott and A.J. Little. A.J. Little is a multidisciplinary artist residing in Montreal. The chosen mediums of their work vacillate, combining elements of film, textile, sculpture, and drawing. Their work primarily explores memory, personalization, and politics through the imagery of the monstrous, the campy, and the grotesque. The themes come together, expressed in a type of personal narrative, making sense of the abstract psychic ills of modern life. Oriah Scott is an award-winning muralist and graffiti writer from Toronto. Currently, his work is exploring the meeting place of form, structure, and meaning. Through the fixation and rendering of planetary orbs, Oriah tries to reconcile the void, not as a formless thing, but as an entity, a shape bursting at the seams. Oriah Scott was born on a dirt road. So this canvas, this circular canvas, the moon, is one of a series of orbs that Oriah Scott has been doing since childhood. And this dead rabbit is AJ's exploration of this the grotesque and the campy. You can see out in the north, AJ experienced a hallucinogenic trip where the moon inverted and became an opening instead of a mass, right? And what happens if it is an opening? You get invited in. You want to. In many cultures see a rabbit in the moon instead of a man or Marilyn Monroe. In Ojibwe cosmology, the rabbit is also a trickster, also really associated with the origin of the universe. And in kind of the public imagination, AJ is also interested in how the libido of the rabbit is sinful and also has the potential for reincarnation, right? So this idea of the rabbit as a symbol of reincarnation. So I think the Ojibwe is that rabbit asked stork to fly up to the moon together, and in so doing kind of became stigmatized, got a wound, and that's why the stork has the red mark on its forehead, because the rabbit touched. But the rabbit lives in the moon as a sense of granting immortality, where the corporeal rabbit is deceased with a stigmata wound on him. AJ also spoke about this from the personal perspective of somebody who's come very close to death very many times, and the connection that you feel to kind of the cosmos when that's the life that you're living in. They linked it to the idea of best possible worlds, which came from Leibniz, a contemporary of Newton, who co-invented calculus separately at the same time, simultaneously invented calculus, but because it's such a theocratic world, everything had to be according to God's design. This is where the idea of a clockwork universe comes from, is that the simpler your equation that can describe everything, the closer you're getting to God's intention, right, to my God's intention. So Newton was trying to find these simple equations, but Leibniz didn't really interrogate any of the answers that he found. His explanation was just that this is the best possible world. Not that things that were bad didn't happen, but that of every world that could have existed, this is the best version of it, because it's the world that God created. And then Voltaire famously in Candide makes fun of this. There's a character who opens the story who's just such an optimist that it's ridiculous. The best possible world. I love everything about this. So somebody who's come so close to death so many times and yet is alive does have to consider this idea of the world that they're inhabiting. And the other thing about this is its reference to graffiti culture, which both Little and Scott participate in as friends and collaborators, where your name, remember all of the toponymy that Bettina Forget is dealing with, and the idea of ownership that Patten's dealing with. In graffiti culture, you design your name, you make up a name, then you design it, and then you place it in public places so high that nobody else could cover it up, and that's how you assert your identity. So you have the height, you have the projection of identity, this idea of the self-portrait being projected in this way through the semiotics of a written word, and then what we see in the moon when we're looking for ourselves. Roundabout. See, this is what would have happened if I had published my essay. There's an essay coming. It just makes as much sense as that right now. It's got to edit a little bit.
Well, it's really intriguing with the dead rabbit. It's interesting that they put that in.
Yeah.
Can you talk more about the reason for that? And is there a connection?
Yes. So, yes, the connection is, the idea is that the rabbit will, so if I understand correctly, this is one of those, I contacted AJ, I said, do you have anything moon? And they were like, yeah, hold on, let me see. And then talked to me about what Oriah had been working on with these orbs. And I think when the conversation started, they were still working out kind of the trip, right? But, I mean, give me a pause so that I can make it make sense to other people. It's a duality, but it's also the essential self is immortal, right? I don't think they would like it if I said there was something martyr about this. I don't think that they would like that, but it's something that I really see. There's certainly a stigmata here, but yeah.
Take away or interrupt from their ideas, but during the time when I was in extreme pain, a lot of times I was very much in that edge of the world, edge of consciousness, and it really does create a different sense of space and time, and a lot of things just disappear. I couldn't carry anything, and so there were no ideas, there was no beliefs, and there was just this sense of being. And so I understand this notion of a portal, and perhaps in a different way. And the reason I asked about the connection, during that same time, I was out in our yard. We live just out in the country, and I occasionally take pictures of wildlife because you bump into them when you're a landscape photographer. They're interesting, they're cool, and there was a rabbit, and it was laying on the ground, just like that. And it was alive, and I thought, should I take a picture? Shouldn't I? I mean, it's really hard to get close to wildlife. And I did take a few pictures from a distance, but I just felt that, just sort of keep my distance. I came back the next day and it was dead. So it's for me, there's an interesting connection to a personal experience, which has nothing to do with their art necessarily, but from my experience, this makes sense.
So when they're afraid and going through pain of their own, they can make their heartbeats slow down to almost nothing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
When they're around something preying on them, they'll do that. Interesting. To try and get away.
Well, that's really interesting. 'Cause
I saw a dead rabbit on the BU campus, and I went and reported it because I was like, I can't pick it up. And then when I went to point it out, and it was gone. Great. So I was afraid that somebody was just like braver than me or something. Put you in the trash can.
Well, it's really
it's filled with farm kids, you know.
It's really interesting being close to animals. Wild animals. And also, like when I was in that sort of state of half conscious, half not, in a lot of pain, sometimes I was out taking pictures and I would bump into wildlife. And it was really interesting, the response. Very little fear.
Because you're giving out something very different, eh?
Yeah, very little fear. It was just this state of connection. And you kind of think about what is it or isn't, but I didn't worry about that. It was just what was happening. It was very bizarre, but very natural. And so there's a real sense of fear or not fear and connection.
Rabbits are fascinating because I have a friend who will go into wildlife and drum, and it'll be the rabbits that come first. They'll bring their babies, they'll bring everyone, and they will do things that no one really sees, so they know it's a gift. So it's almost like they're acting and giving a gift back.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Rabbits are
fascinating. The sculpture is plaster on expanding foam. It's been carved. It's super delicate. The plaster is really thin, and unwrapping it from its packaging was quite scary. Nothing came off, AJ. But it gives it this sense of a ruin, right? The sense of something that could be conserved, that could be protected, but there's no reason to, right? This is the corporeal, and we have to let go. But also, sorry, as I was doing, it's very lightweight, right, and delicate. So as I was unwrapping it, it's horrific. It's a horrific sculpture. I was kind of like, I cared for it. And as I was laying out the soil, I was kind of, Okay. Questions? Carrie Allison is a multidisciplinary visual artist of Nihok Cree, Métis, and Mixed European descent, based in Jembuktuk, Mi'kmaq, Halifax, Nova Scotia. She grew up on the unceded and unsurrendered lands of the Squamish, Stolo, and Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam nations. Her maternal roots and relations are based in Masco-Tewisipi, High Prairie, Alberta, Treaty 8. She holds a Master in Fine Art, a Bachelor in Art History, and a Bachelor in Fine Art from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally. She was the 2020 recipient of the Melissa Levin Award from the Textile Museum of Canada and was longlisted for the 2021 Sobey Art Award. Her work has been shown in Canadian Art at Quebec, SE, and Visual Arts News. So she has 2 video works in here, which are stop motion animations, as she describes them. This one's called The Pull of the Moon. And as you can see, the stop motion animation element of it is that she is beating a moon and animating the growth of it. It's superimposed over an ocean scene, which was filmed by Jason Simkin. Shout out to Jason Simkin. There is a soundtrack of the ocean if you approach the TV. And what I like about this is the crepuscular moment that she's found, right? So it's just before and just after the sunset in both cases, which is a moment, right? It's not a time period, and yet it's captured in here. So as the moons form over time, you know, using animation of a growing moon, I think creates a really interesting juxtaposition. And what this is about is the experience of having a child that has come earthside. Right? So as she was expecting her first child, she was thinking about how incomprehensibly strong the force between them was, much like the invisible gravitational pull that keeps the Earth and the Moon connected, and how a person changes from being one to being two. It's an actual changing of state. She's also very interested in the undermining of traditional craft practices as it parallels the undervaluation of women's work, specifically as far as motherhood is concerned. And this one, so another thing that I really like is this, all of the different, I talked about all the different time frames that are at play here, is that this is about 6 beads a second. If you actually watch the building of it, it's quite fast. It's like there's a rush to get growing, but the expansion happens quite slowly. So playing with all of those different demands on patients, but meanwhile, and I think it must feel that way to grow a body inside of you as well, that it's slow and fast at the same time. Okay, and then finally, we'll go into our room during the tour. So in this room, we have a space to sit and experience the work My Moon. We're lucky to be in at this part where the moon is being built at the rate of 1 bead per breath. So this is a more recent piece that she created after her child had come earthside. And together you can see how taking all of the context of time out of the work is the conclusion that she's given herself for what happens when this being and you are finally together, when that pull has been satisfied, right? The soundtrack is by Jesse Beer, and it's this, if you can hear online, but certainly those of us here, it becomes very loud in a kind of drone genre, and ends with the dying fall. Jesse Beer has this I found it when I was researching this exhibition, a really interesting body of work about the sounds of celestial objects. As we listen more and more, you could go online and hear a whole bunch of them, but they've always been distorted and sped up and done all these things in order to accommodate our lives, right? In order to make sure that we still feel like we can relate to them as though they're singing to us, but in fact, the sound that they make is incomprehensible. It has nothing to do with music. It has nothing to do with voice, and the way that what that says about us, that we need to interpret things in that way. And she talks about, I can't remember the philosopher, but the idea of a child singing to themselves when they're walking home alone, and how it creates a boundary, a safe bubble, as far as your voice can reach. That's my space, right? So that's not related to this necessarily, but having found that article, I think it relates to everything that we're talking about as well, as you project bits of yourself out in order to expand into spaces that you belong in. This piece is exactly 7 minutes long, which is a number that has significance in the Niha Cree culture. And if we watch to the end, you'll see that she infuriatingly doesn't finish her circle, right? It doesn't end when it meets again at the top. And she said specifically that's in order to make everybody it's going to be forever, right? So that's my moon.
You talk about how this was made?
Yeah, so
What are we looking at? Drawing?
no, so this is her beading. She has a table set up, and she takes a photo every time that she does the beading. She aligns them. Yeah, yeah. Her practice is largely beading. She's multidisciplinary, but I don't want to put words in her mouth about something so personal, but the idea of stepping out of the grind, taking that new state, that state change into mother as seriously as it deserves to be taken, was very important to her as she was creating this. So the slow work, the traditional practices that do connect to roots. Yeah. There you go.
Thank you.
I wrote to her after she sent me the full video, and I said, why would you do that to us? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so one by one, that was it. Look more deeply. Obviously, the Women with Impact, each one of them is a portrait, and they all have different features, and they're great fun. Are there any questions online? Okay, well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. Do you have any last words, Doug?
Nope.
Any questions from you guys? Thank you. Okay. Have a great weekend. Thanks for staying, Brandon.